Few rock bands have achieved the legendary status of Queen, but behind their anthemic hits and theatrical performances lies a treasure trove of bizarre secrets that would make even their most devoted fans do a double take. From Freddie Mercury's obsessive phone calls to his cats while touring to a homemade guitar built from a Victorian fireplace that rocked stadiums worldwide, Queen's story is filled with eccentric behaviors, controversial decisions, and downright strange incidents that shaped rock history. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Queen. Fact 1. Freddie Mercury called his cats while touring. Most rock stars call home to check on their families while touring. But Freddie Mercury took this to an entirely different level by insisting on having personal conversations with his cats. The Queen frontman would regularly phone his London home during tours specifically to talk to his beloved feline companions, creating one of the most endearing and unusual touring rituals in rock history. According to Peter Freestone, Mercury's longtime personal assistant who witnessed these calls firsthand, the routine was surprisingly elaborate and heartfelt. When Mercury arrived at his hotel after a show, he would immediately call home and ask whoever was caring for his cats to hold the phone up to each animal so he could hear them meow. Mary Austin, Mercury's close friend and former fiancée who often looked after the cats, would patiently pick up each cat in turn and place them near the receiver while Mercury spoke to them from thousands of miles away. Freestone described how Mercury would genuinely talk to his cats as if they were children, and he truly believed they could understand him through the phone. The assistant noted that Mercury would even ask Mary to turn up the volume on the receiver so the cats could better hear his voice calling to them from distant cities around the world. These weren't quick check-ins either. Mercury would spend considerable time on these calls, making sure to speak to each of his cats individually. The ritual continued throughout Mercury's entire career with Queen, spanning multiple tours and different feline family members. At various times, Mercury owned up to 10 cats, including Tom, Jerry, Tiffany, Dorothy, Delilah, Goliath, Lily, Miko, Oscar, and Romeo. Each cat received equal attention during these international phone calls, regardless of whether Mercury was calling from Japan, America, or anywhere else Queen's touring schedule took him. This touching habit reveals a softer side of the flamboyant performer who commanded stadium crowds, showing that even rock legends need to maintain connections with the things they love most, even if those things happen to be furry and communicate primarily through meowing. Fact 2. Brian May's guitar is built from a 100-year-old fireplace. Brian May's legendary guitar, known as the Red Special, wasn't purchased from any famous guitar company, but was instead built entirely by hand, using salvaged materials from around his childhood home, including wood from a Victorian-era fireplace that was over 100 years old. In 1963, when 16-year-old Brian wanted an electric guitar but his family couldn't afford expensive instruments like a Fender Stratocaster or Gibson Les Paul, he and his father Harold decided to create something even better than what was available in stores. Harold May, who worked as an electrical engineer, had the perfect piece of wood sitting in his workshop, a mahogany mantelpiece from a Victorian fireplace that had been salvaged from a building that was being demolished. This ancient piece of wood, which had been seasoned and dried for over a century, became the neck of what would become one of rock music's most famous guitars. The wood was so old that it was filled with wormholes from insects that had burrowed through it decades earlier. But Brian and his father found a creative solution by carefully filling each hole with ordinary matchsticks and then sanding everything smooth. The project took the father and son team over a year to complete, starting in August of 1963 and finishing in October of 1964. They used only hand tools like chisels, sandpaper, and hand-cranked lathes to shape every component. The body was constructed from pieces of an old oak table, while other family items contributed to the guitar's unique character. Brian's mother, Ruth, donated buttons from her collection to serve as fret markers, and one of her knitting needles was repurposed as the tip for the tremolo arm. What makes this story even more remarkable is that this homemade instrument became Brian May's primary guitar throughout Queen's entire career, appearing on every album and at virtually every live performance. The Red Special has never needed to be refretted despite decades of constant professional use, proving that the craftsmanship of a 16-year-old boy and his engineer father was superior to many factory-made instruments. Fact 3. Freddie wrote Crazy Little Thing Called Love in the Bath. One of Queen's biggest hits, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, was written in one of the most unusual locations imaginable, Freddie Mercury's bathtub. According to rock legend, Mercury was so inspired while taking a relaxing bath that he reportedly had his piano moved to his bathroom so he could compose the entire song without having to get out of the water and lose his creative momentum. The song, which became a #1 hit in the United States and reached the top 10 in multiple countries around the world, was written in 1979, during a period when Mercury was experimenting with different musical styles. Crazy Little Thing Called Love marked a significant departure from Queen's typical operatic rock sound, instead embracing a rockabilly style that paid tribute to Elvis Presley and the early days of rock and roll music. What makes this bathroom composition story even more remarkable is how quickly Mercury supposedly wrote the song. Band members have described how the entire track came together in just a few minutes, while Mercury was soaking in his tub, with the melody and basic chord structure flowing out of him almost effortlessly. The logistics of actually getting a piano into a bathroom raise obvious questions about how this scenario physically worked, but the story has become part of Queen folklore and speaks to Mercury's reputation for finding inspiration in the most unexpected moments and places. The song's simple 3-chord structure and straightforward lyrics were intentionally designed to capture the essence of 1950s rock and roll, and Mercury's bathroom breakthrough resulted in one of Queen's most commercially successful singles. Crazy Little Thing Called Love spent 4 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart and became the band's first #1 hit in the United States, proving that great songs can come from the most ordinary and private moments in an artist's life. Whether the piano was actually moved to the bathroom or Mercury simply hummed the tune while bathing and then rushed to his instrument afterward, the story captures the spontaneous and unconventional creative process that made Mercury such a unique songwriter in rock history. Fact 4. Queen's microphone stand accident became Freddie's signature. Freddie Mercury's iconic half microphone stand that he wielded like a sword and twirled around stages worldwide wasn't a carefully planned stage prop, but actually the result of a complete accident that happened early in Queen's career. During one of their performances in the early 1970s, the heavy bass of Mercury's microphone stand broke off or fell away, leaving him holding just the top half with the microphone attached to a long metal pole. Instead of stopping the show or asking for a replacement microphone stand, Mercury simply continued performing with this broken piece of equipment and quickly discovered that the shortened stand gave him much more freedom and flexibility on stage. The baseless microphone stand was lighter and easier to maneuver, allowing him to use it as an extension of his theatrical performance style, rather than being anchored to one spot on the stage like most singers of that era. What started as an equipment malfunction became Mercury's trademark performance tool, and he began deliberately removing the bases from microphone stands for every subsequent Queen performance. The half stand became an integral part of his stage presence, serving as both a microphone and a theatrical prop that he could point at the audience, wave above his head, or use to punctuate dramatic moments in Queen's songs. Mercury's ability to turn this accident into an advantage perfectly captured his approach to performance. He was always looking for ways to connect more directly with audiences and create a more dynamic visual experience. The broken microphone stand allowed him to move freely across massive stadium stages while still maintaining vocal control, and it became so associated with his image that it's now displayed in rock museums and appears in countless photographs and videos of Queen's live performances. This accidental innovation influenced countless other rock performers who began adopting similar staging techniques, but none ever wielded a microphone stand with quite the same theatrical flair and commanding presence that Mercury brought to every Queen concert throughout his career. Fact 5. The band appeared on British stamps illegally. In 1999, Queen inadvertently broke one of the most sacred rules of British postal tradition when Roger Taylor appeared in the background of a Royal Mail stamp that was supposed to feature only Freddie Mercury, creating a controversy that highlighted the strict protocols surrounding who can appear on official British postage. The stamp was part of a special series celebrating British cultural achievements, and it featured a dramatic photograph of Mercury performing on stage during one of Queen's iconic concerts. The problem arose because British postal regulations have traditionally stated that only deceased individuals and living members of the royal family are permitted to appear on official stamps, a rule designed to maintain the dignity and exclusivity of royal postage. When the stamp was released, eagle-eyed collectors and music fans quickly noticed that Roger Taylor, Queen's drummer, was clearly visible in the background of the concert photograph, even though he was very much alive at the time and definitely not a member of the royal family. This discovery caused a significant stir among postal authorities and stamp collectors, as it represented a rare breach of long-standing Royal Mail protocols that had been carefully maintained for decades. The controversy was particularly awkward because the stamp had already been printed and distributed to post offices across the United Kingdom, making it impossible to recall or modify without considerable expense and logistical complications. Royal Mail officials found themselves in the unusual position of having to explain how a living rock musician had ended up on official British postage alongside the intended tribute to the deceased Freddie Mercury. The incident highlighted the challenges of using concert photography for commemorative stamps, since live performance images often capture multiple band members and audience members who might not be intended subjects of the postal tribute. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the stamp became highly sought after by both Queen fans and stamp collectors, turning what was technically a mistake into a valuable collector's item that now represents one of the most unusual breaches of British postal protocol in modern history. Fact 6. Freddie had Christmas stockings for each cat. Every Christmas, Freddie Mercury would carefully prepare individual stockings filled with toys and treats for each of his 10 cats, treating his feline family with the same care and attention that most parents give to their human children during the holiday season. This elaborate Christmas tradition took place at his London mansion, Garden Lodge, where Mercury would personally select special gifts for each cat based on their individual personalities and preferences. According to Jim Hutton, Mercury's partner of 7 years who lived at Garden Lodge and witnessed these Christmas celebrations firsthand, Mercury would spend considerable time and effort ensuring that every cat received equal attention during the holidays. Each stocking was filled with cat toys, special treats, and sometimes even catnip, and Mercury would hang them up just like any family would do for their children on Christmas Eve. The cats that received these special Christmas treatments included Tom, Jerry, Tiffany, Dorothy, Delilah, Goliath, Lily, Miko, Oscar, and Romeo, and Mercury made sure that no cat was left out of the holiday festivities regardless of when they had joined his household. Peter Freestone, Mercury's longtime personal assistant, confirmed that Mercury's cats were genuinely his family, and the Christmas stocking tradition was just one example of how seriously he took his role as their caretaker. Mercury's devotion to his cats extended far beyond Christmas, as he provided them with freshly prepared meals of chicken and fish, allowed them to roam freely throughout his mansion during the day, and even had separate living quarters set up for them. The Christmas stocking tradition perfectly captured Mercury's belief that his cats deserved the same love, attention, and special treatment that any beloved family member would receive during important celebrations. This heartwarming ritual continued throughout Mercury's life and demonstrated a tender, nurturing side of the rock star that contrasted sharply with his flamboyant stage persona. showing that even the most theatrical performers can have surprisingly domestic and caring private lives centered around the animals they love. Fact 7. Queen got UN blacklisted for apartheid concerts. In 1984, Queen made one of the most controversial decisions of their career when they chose to perform a series of concerts at Sun City in South Africa, directly violating an international cultural boycott and ultimately landing themselves on the United Nations official blacklist of artists who had broken sanctions against the apartheid regime. At the time, South Africa was under a brutal system of racial segregation known as apartheid, and the international community had implemented economic, trade, and cultural boycotts to pressure the white minority government to end its oppressive policies. Queen's decision to play 12 scheduled performances at the Sun City Resort in Bophuthatswana was met with immediate and widespread condemnation from anti-apartheid activists, the United Nations, and Britain's Musicians Union, which actually fined the band for breaking the cultural boycott. The controversy became even more intense when the band was featured prominently in the 1985 protest song Sun City by Artists United Against Apartheid, a supergroup led by Little Steven Van Zandt that included Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, and dozens of other major artists who were calling attention to musicians who had performed at the South African resort. The band defended their decision by claiming they were a non-political group that played for all fans regardless of race, and they pointed out that other major artists like Rod Stewart and Barry Manilow had also performed at Sun City without receiving the same level of criticism. However, Queen's higher profile and the timing of their performances made them a particular target for international outrage, and they remained on the United Nations blacklist until apartheid officially ended in 1990. Roger Taylor later admitted in interviews that the South Africa performances were probably a mistake, acknowledging the significant damage the controversy did to Queen's reputation, especially in their home country of England, where they were temporarily treated as pariahs. The incident became known as the greatest blemish on Queen's career and demonstrated how even attempts to remain apolitical can have serious political consequences in highly charged international situations. Fact 8. Under Pressure was a spontaneous jam session, one of Queen's most beloved collaborations. Under Pressure, with David Bowie, came about through pure chance when both artists happened to be working at the same recording studio in Switzerland and decided to jam together on a song that Queen wasn't completely satisfied with. In 1981, Queen was recording their album Hot Space at Mountain Studios in Montreux when Bowie, who was also working on his own project at the same facility, stopped by to see what the band was doing. Queen had been struggling with a song they were calling Feel Like, and they weren't entirely happy with how it was developing. So when Bowie expressed interest in hearing what they were working on, the five musicians spontaneously began jamming on the song's chord progression together. What started as an informal musical conversation between friends quickly evolved into something much more significant as Bowie began contributing new lyrics and vocal ideas that transformed the entire direction of the song. According to Brian May, it was unusual for Queen to relinquish creative control to an outside artist, but Bowie was having what May described as a genius moment that resulted in some of the most memorable and meaningful lyrics in either artist's catalog. The collaboration was so natural and productive that they decided to completely rework the song, with Bowie contributing the distinctive bass line and helping to craft the powerful lyrics about social pressure and human connection that would make Under Pressure such an enduring hit. However, the creative process wasn't entirely smooth, as tensions arose during the mixing stage when Mercury and Bowie had different ideas about how the final version should sound. The studio engineer wasn't completely familiar with the equipment, so the final mix ended up being a compromise between the two artists' competing visions for the song. Despite these behind-the-scenes challenges, Under Pressure became one of the most successful and critically acclaimed songs by either Queen or Bowie, proving that sometimes the best musical collaborations happen when artists simply follow their instincts and let creativity flow naturally without overthinking the process. Fact 9. Freddie designed Queen's logo using astrology he didn't believe in. Freddie Mercury created Queen's elaborate and iconic crest logo by incorporating the zodiac signs of all 4 band members, despite openly claiming that he didn't actually believe in astrology or the power of astrological symbols. Drawing on his art school background from Ealing Art College, where he had studied graphic design, Mercury designed the ornate emblem that would become one of the most recognizable logos in rock music history, using celestial symbols that represented each member's birth sign. The Queen crest features 2 lions to represent the Leo zodiac signs of Roger Taylor and John Deacon, a crab symbolizing Brian May's Cancer sign, and 2 fairies representing Mercury's own Virgo sign. Mercury arranged these astrological symbols around a stylized letter Q, with the lions embracing the letter while flames rise above the crab, and the fairies shelter below each lion, creating a complex and visually striking design that would appear on album covers, merchandise, and stage backdrops throughout the band's career. What makes this design choice particularly interesting is that Mercury was known to be skeptical about astrology and often dismissed horoscopes and astrological predictions as nonsense. Yet he chose to make these celestial symbols the foundation of Queen's visual identity. The contradiction between his personal beliefs and his artistic choices suggests that Mercury viewed the zodiac signs more as useful design elements and symbolic representations of the band members' personalities rather than as mystical or supernatural influences. Mercury topped off the entire crest with an enormous phoenix, a mythical bird that symbolizes rebirth and renewal, which he positioned as a protective symbol watching over the band and their music. The phoenix wasn't connected to any specific zodiac sign, but rather served as Mercury's artistic addition to create a sense of grandeur and mysticism that would complement Queen's theatrical musical style. The finished logo perfectly captured the band's combination of classical influences, theatrical flair, and rock and roll rebellion, and it became so closely associated with Queen's identity that fans around the world can instantly recognize the crest even without seeing the band's name alongside it. Fact 10. Bohemian Rhapsody was the most expensive song ever recorded. When Bohemian Rhapsody was released in 1975, it held the record as the most expensive single song ever recorded, with production costs that would equal approximately $500,000 in today's money, due to the incredibly complex and time-consuming recording process that Queen demanded to bring Freddie Mercury's vision to life. The song's astronomical cost came from the weeks of studio time required to layer 160 separate vocal overdubs, creating the operatic middle section that made the track so unique and groundbreaking in popular music. The recording process took place across multiple studios, including Rockfield Studios, Roundhouse, SARM East Studios, Scorpio Sound, and Wessex Sound Studios, as Queen moved from location to access different equipment and achieve the specific sounds that Mercury had envisioned for each section of the 6-minute epic. The band spent an entire week just on the opera section alone, with Mercury, Brian May, and Roger Taylor meticulously recording layer after layer of harmonized vocals to create what sounded like a full choir, even though it was just the 3 of them singing multiple parts. The technical challenges of creating Bohemian Rhapsody in 1975 were enormous, as digital recording technology didn't exist yet, and everything had to be done using 24-track analog equipment that required precise timing and countless takes to get each vocal layer perfectly synchronized. Producer Roy Thomas Baker and the band had to splice together tape recordings by hand, and they pushed the analog recording technology of the time to its absolute limits to achieve the layered, orchestral sound that Mercury wanted. The enormous expense was justified when Bohemian Rhapsody became Queen's biggest hit and one of the most influential songs in rock history. But at the time, EMI Records executives were extremely nervous about investing so much money in a single track that broke every conventional rule about radio-friendly pop music. The song's success proved that sometimes the most expensive creative risks can also be the most rewarding. both artistically and commercially. Fact 11. Freddie accidentally got high on tea. In the early 1970s, when all four members of Queen were living together in a shared flat and struggling to make ends meet as an unknown band, Freddie Mercury accidentally got himself high by drinking tea that had been mixed with marijuana, completely unaware of what he was consuming. During this period, the band members would sometimes purchase marijuana that came pre-mixed with jasmine tea, which was a common way that dealers would sell the drug at the time, requiring buyers to carefully separate the cannabis from the tea leaves before use. The other band members were aware of this arrangement and would typically spend time picking through the mixture to separate the marijuana from the jasmine tea, but Mercury was generally uninterested in drugs and didn't pay attention to these activities that were happening around the flat. On the day of the incident, Mercury simply saw what he assumed was regular jasmine tea sitting in the kitchen and decided to brew himself a cup without realizing that it was actually the unseparated mixture that still contained marijuana. According to band lore, Mercury drank the entire cup of tea without suspecting anything unusual until he began experiencing the effects of the cannabis and realized something was definitely wrong with his afternoon beverage. The incident apparently came as a complete surprise to Mercury, who had no intention of getting high and was simply looking for a relaxing cup of tea during what was probably a typical day of band rehearsals or songwriting sessions. This accidental drug experience became part of Queen's early history and highlighted Mercury's general lack of interest in recreational drugs during a time when many rock musicians were heavily involved in the drug culture of the 1970s. The story also captures the casual, communal living situation that the four band members shared during their early years, when they were all focused on building their musical career and had little money for separate housing arrangements. The incident remains one of the more amusing tales from Queen's pre-fame days, when they were just four young musicians sharing a flat and accidentally mixing up their tea supplies. Fact 12. Queen wrote songs for a cat named Delilah. Freddie Mercury's love for his cats reached such extraordinary levels that he actually wrote and recorded songs specifically about them, most notably creating a track called Delilah that was dedicated to his favorite feline and included surprisingly honest lyrics about her bathroom habits on his expensive furniture. The song Delilah appeared on Queen's final album, Innuendo, in 1991, and sounds like a typical love song until listeners realize that Mercury is singing about a cat who pees all over his valuable Chippendale furniture suite. Mercury's devotion to his cats went far beyond just writing songs about them, as he also dedicated his entire 1985 solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, to his feline family, with a heartfelt message that read, "To my cat Jerry, also Tom, Oscar, and Tiffany, and all the cat lovers across the universe." This dedication appeared in the album's liner notes and showed that Mercury considered his cats important enough to acknowledge in his professional musical work, treating them as genuine sources of inspiration for his artistry. The song Delilah featured Brian May playing a guitar solo that was specifically designed to sound like cat meows, adding another layer of feline tribute to what was already an unusual rock song about a pet. Mercury sang about how Delilah made him happy when she cuddled up to sleep beside him, but also acknowledged her mischievous behavior and how she would sometimes bite and scratch when she was in a bad mood. What makes these musical tributes even more remarkable is that Mercury was writing about real cats with distinct personalities that he genuinely knew and loved, rather than using cats as abstract symbols or metaphors for human relationships. Delilah was reportedly Mercury's absolute favorite among all his cats, which explains why she earned the honor of having an entire song written specifically about her quirks, habits, and the joy she brought to Mercury's life at his London mansion. This musical dedication to his pets demonstrates how deeply Mercury's cats were integrated into every aspect of his life, including his creative process and professional recording career. Fact 13. Brian May uses coins instead of guitar picks. Throughout his entire career with Queen and beyond, Brian May has never used traditional guitar picks. instead relying exclusively on old British sixpence coins that he believes give him a unique sound and superior control over his playing technique. This unusual choice began in May's youth, when he discovered that the serrated edges and specific weight of sixpence coins produced a different tone and attack than standard plastic guitar picks. And he became so attached to this approach that he never switched to conventional picks even after achieving worldwide fame. The sixpence coins that May uses are no longer in circulation, as Britain switched to decimal currency in 1971, which means that May has had to carefully collect and preserve these old coins to maintain his supply for live performances and studio recordings. The coins are made of a silver-colored metal alloy and have distinctive milled edges that create a slightly different contact with the guitar strings compared to smooth plastic picks, resulting in the characteristic bright and articulate tone that has become part of May's signature sound. May has explained in interviews that he holds the coin between his thumb and index finger, in the same way that other guitarists would hold a traditional pick, but the weight and texture of the metal give him what he describes as better control over dynamics and attack when playing both rhythm parts and lead solos. The rigidity of the metal coin also allows him to achieve very precise string articulation, which is particularly important for the complex harmonized guitar parts that Queen is famous for. This unconventional technique has become so closely associated with May's playing style that guitar equipment companies have actually created replica sixpence coin picks for fans who want to emulate his sound. However, May continues to use actual vintage sixpence coins from his personal collection, maintaining the same approach to guitar playing that he developed as a teenager, learning to play on his homemade red special guitar, proving that sometimes the most effective musical techniques come from creative experimentation rather than following established conventions. Fact 14. Freddie threw a hibachi through a window over a missing cat. Freddie Mercury's devotion to his cats reached such intense levels that when his black male cat named Goliath went missing from his London mansion, he became so emotionally distraught that he hurled a beautiful and expensive Japanese hibachi grill straight through the window of his guest bedroom in a moment of complete despair. This dramatic incident was witnessed and later recounted by Jim Hutton, Mercury's partner of 7 years, who described how Mercury's mood could shift from complete joy to absolute panic whenever anything threatened the well-being of his beloved feline family. According to Hutton's account in his memoir, Mercury became frantic almost immediately after realizing that Goliath had disappeared from the Garden Lodge estate, and his emotional state deteriorated rapidly as he searched the house and grounds without finding any trace of the missing cat. The hibachi that Mercury threw through the window was described as a particularly beautiful piece, which makes the incident even more remarkable since Mercury was known for his appreciation of fine art and beautiful objects. Yet his concern for Goliath was so overwhelming that he destroyed valuable property in his emotional outburst. The story illustrates just how deeply Mercury's cats were integrated into his emotional life and how their absence could affect him on a profound psychological level. Hutton explained that Mercury treated his cats exactly like children, and anyone who has ever lost a beloved pet can probably understand the panic and helplessness that Mercury must have felt when he couldn't locate Goliath anywhere on the property. Fortunately, the story has a happy ending, as Goliath eventually reappeared safe and sound, which immediately transformed Mercury's mood from desperate anxiety back to his normal, cheerful demeanor. After the cat returned, Mercury reportedly gave Goliath a loving scolding for wandering off and causing such worry, treating the incident exactly as a concerned parent would handle a child who had scared them by disappearing without permission. This window-breaking episode perfectly captures the intensity of Mercury's emotional attachment to his cats and shows how even the most composed performers can completely lose control when their beloved pets go missing. Fact 15. Queen's guitar contains mother's knitting needles and buttons. Brian May's legendary red special guitar is truly a family heirloom that incorporates pieces from his mother Ruth's personal belongings, including buttons from her collection that serve as fret markers and a knitting needle that was repurposed as the tip of the guitar's tremolo arm. When 16-year-old Brian and his father Harold were building the guitar in the early 1960s, they needed small decorative pieces to mark specific frets on the fingerboard, and Ruth generously donated buttons from her sewing collection to help complete her son's musical project. The buttons that Ruth contributed were carefully selected and positioned at specific fret locations on the guitar neck, where they still remain today as functional fret markers that help May navigate the fingerboard during performances and recording sessions. These weren't just any ordinary buttons, but pieces from Ruth's personal collection that she had accumulated over years of sewing and crafting, making them meaningful family artifacts that became permanently embedded in one of rock music's most famous instruments. Even more remarkably, Ruth also contributed one of her knitting needles, which Harold and Brian modified and attached to the end of the guitar's tremolo arm to serve as the tip that players grip when using the vibrato system. This knitting needle tip has remained on the Red Special throughout May's entire career with Queen, meaning that Ruth's contribution to the guitar's construction has been present at every major Queen performance and recording session since the band's formation. The inclusion of these domestic household items in a professional musical instrument perfectly captures the collaborative family effort that went into creating the Red Special, with each member of the May household contributing whatever materials they could find to help Brian achieve his dream of owning a high-quality electric guitar. Ruth's buttons and knitting needle transformed what could have been just another homemade guitar into a genuine family treasure that carries emotional significance far beyond its musical capabilities. This personal touch makes the Red Special unique among famous guitars, as it literally contains pieces of Brian May's family history that connect his childhood home to the stadium stages where Queen performed for millions of fans around the world.